Lady Evelyn Ashcroft had once been the kind of young woman people paused to admire. Not because she was the most beautiful lady in the kingdom of Aldermere, though many claimed she was. Not because she belonged to an ancient noble bloodline, though her family name carried centuries of history. People noticed her because she possessed something rarer than beauty or status. She moved through the world with quiet kindness, speaking gently to servants, remembering names others forgot, and offering warmth where most aristocrats offered only pride. That was before everything collapsed. The spring morning she discovered she was carrying a child should have been one of happiness. She had been engaged to Lord Nathaniel Hawthorne for nearly a year. Their wedding invitations had already been delivered. Their future had appeared certain. For 3 glorious days, Evelyn had allowed herself to dream. Then Nathaniel changed. The man who had once kissed her hand and sworn eternal devotion suddenly became distant. His letters stopped arriving. His visits ended without explanation. Whenever she asked questions, he found excuses to leave. A week later, he publicly announced the engagement was over. The ballroom where he delivered the news remained burned into Evelyn's memory. Hundreds of nobles had watched as Nathaniel stepped away from her. Hundreds had listened as he declared that no honorable man could marry a woman carrying a child whose parentage could not be trusted. The accusation struck harder than any physical blow. Evelyn remembered the gasps, the whispers, the cruel stares. She remembered trying to speak and finding no words. Most of all, she remembered Nathaniel's eyes. There had been no guilt in them, only calculation. Within days, gossip spread through every corner of the kingdom. Stories multiplied faster than truth could follow. Some claimed she had secretly entertained other men. Others suggested she had always been immoral beneath her polished appearance. No one cared whether any of it was true. Scandal was far more entertaining than innocence. By summer, invitations stopped arriving. Friends disappeared. Doors closed. Evelyn's parents had died years earlier, leaving her estate under the control of distant relatives. Her uncle, Cedric Ashcroft, viewed her disgrace not as a tragedy but as an inconvenience. She had become damaged property. Nothing more. The pregnancy advanced. So did her uncle's bitterness. Every meal became a lecture. Every conversation became an insult. Every glance reminded her that she was no longer welcome beneath the roof where she had grown up. Then came the morning he revealed his plan. "You still possess value," he told her coldly. The words made her stomach tighten. "Value?" she whispered. Cedric smiled. It was the smile of a man counting coins. 3 days later, a carriage carried Evelyn toward the capital. No explanation was offered. Only orders. Only silence. When they finally arrived, she understood. The annual aristocratic market filled the city square. Merchants displayed rare goods. Landowners negotiated estates. Nobles arranged marriages and alliances. But one platform stood above all the others. A raised wooden stage surrounded by curious spectators. The sight turned Evelyn's blood to ice. "No," she breathed. Her uncle did not answer. Servants escorted her toward the platform. She resisted. Not violently. Not loudly. But every trembling step carried desperation. The crowd noticed her immediately. Whispers spread. Faces turned. Recognition followed. The fallen fiancé. The disgraced noblewoman. The pregnant lady. A servant hung a wooden sign around her neck. Evelyn looked down. The words blurred through tears. Already pregnant. The humiliation was so complete that for a moment she could not breathe. Laughter erupted somewhere in the crowd. Then another voice joined. Then another. Mockery rolled through the square like thunder. Some pointed. Others smirked openly. A group of noblewomen covered their mouths while exchanging amused remarks. Several gentlemen examined her as though she were livestock. Evelyn lowered her head. One hand instinctively covered her swollen stomach. The child shifted beneath her palm. The tiny movement nearly broke her. Everyone else saw disgrace. Only she knew the innocent life she carried. Only she knew how fiercely she already loved her baby. An auctioneer climbed onto the platform. His voice boomed across the square. "Lady Evelyn Ashcroft." More laughter followed. Young. Noble. Educated. The crowd listened with amusement. The auctioneer continued. One complication included. The square erupted again. Evelyn closed her eyes. Each laugh felt like a stone striking exposed skin. The bidding began. Small amounts. Insulting amounts. Amounts so low they transformed a noblewoman into a joke. Men who would never seriously consider marrying her offered coins merely to entertain themselves. The crowd enjoyed every moment. Hours seemed to pass. The summer sun drifted across the sky. The weight of humiliation settled deeper into Evelyn's bones. For the first time in her life, she wondered whether Nathaniel had succeeded completely. Perhaps everyone truly believed she deserved this. Perhaps no one would ever see anything beyond the scandal. Perhaps this was all that remained of her future. Then a sudden silence swept across the square. The change was immediate. Sure. Unnatural. Thousands of eyes shifted toward the entrance road. A line of black carriages approached. Mounted guards followed. The crowd parted without instruction. Fear and respect traveled together through the gathering. Evelyn slowly lifted her head. A tall man stepped from the lead carriage. Dark coat, silver insignia, commanding posture. The kind of presence that altered the atmosphere merely by existing. Duke Alexander Blackwood. The most powerful nobleman in Aldermere. The auctioneer straightened instantly. Spectators whispered. Everyone expected outrage. Everyone expected intervention. Everyone expected the Duke to condemn what was happening. Alexander's gaze settled on the platform. For a long moment he studied Evelyn. Not her disgrace. Not the sign. The woman beneath the humiliation. Something unreadable flickered across his face. Then he reached into his coat and withdrew a single gold coin. The crowd exchanged confused looks. Alexander stepped forward. The coin landed on the auction table with a clear metallic sound that somehow carried through the entire square. The auctioneer blinked. No one spoke. No one moved. And then the Duke looked directly into Evelyn's tear-filled eyes, extended his hand toward her, and quietly said 4 words that changed everything. "Come with me, Lady Evelyn." The entire square seemed to stop breathing. Lady Evelyn Ashcroft stared at the hand extended toward her, unable to believe what she was seeing. Moments earlier she had been a spectacle. A joke. A discarded woman standing beneath the weight of public humiliation. Now the most powerful duke in Aldermere stood before her as though none of those things mattered. The crowd waited. So did Duke Alexander Blackwood. His expression remained calm, but there was quiet certainty in his eyes. Not pity. Not amusement. Certainty. Evelyn's trembling fingers slowly lifted and settled into his hand. Warmth met cold. Strength met exhaustion. The simple gesture felt strangely significant. A murmur rippled through the square. Alexander turned toward the auctioneer. "The lady is leaving." No one argued. No one dared. The auctioneer swallowed visibly and nodded. Cedric Ashcroft stepped forward at once. "What exactly do you intend to do with her?" he demanded. Alexander's gaze shifted toward him. The temperature of the moment seemed to drop. "What I do is none of your concern." Cedric's confidence vanished instantly. The Duke guided Evelyn down from the platform. For the first time that day her feet touched the ground as a free woman. The crowd parted before them. Some stared in disbelief. Others whispered furiously. Many simply watched, unable to understand why Alexander Blackwood would involve himself with a disgraced pregnant noblewoman. Evelyn heard none of it. Her thoughts were lost somewhere between relief and confusion. The Duke's carriage awaited nearby. A servant opened the door. Alexander offered his hand again. She accepted it without hesitation. The carriage door closed. The noise of the city disappeared. Silence settled between them. For several minutes neither spoke. Rain clouds drifted across the afternoon sky outside the windows. Evelyn clasped her hands tightly over her stomach. She kept waiting for questions. For judgment. For conditions. Instead, Alexander simply sat opposite her. At last he broke the silence. "Are you injured?" The question startled her. Of all the things he could have asked, she had not expected that. "No. You were standing for several hours." "I am accustomed to discomfort." A shadow crossed his face. No woman should become accustomed to it. The carriage continued rolling toward the northern hills where Blackwood Castle overlooked the kingdom. Evelyn lowered her eyes. "Why did you help me?" Alexander studied her quietly. "Because what happened in that square was wrong." She waited for more. None came. The answer sounded simple. Yet somehow it felt genuine. Hours later the castle appeared upon the horizon. Massive stone towers rose against darkening clouds. Golden lights glowed from hundreds of windows. The sight stole Evelyn's breath. She had visited noble estates before. None compared to Blackwood Castle. The carriage crossed the iron gates. Servants lined the entrance courtyard. Evelyn immediately noticed their surprise. News of the auction had clearly arrived before she had. Alexander stepped from the carriage. Then he turned and helped her descend. The servants stared. Not openly. Not rudely. but enough for Evelyn to notice. Humiliation stirred inside her once more. The Duke sensed it immediately. "Lady Evelyn is my guest." His voice carried across the courtyard. Every servant straightened. "She will be treated with the same respect afforded any member of this household." No one questioned him. No one hesitated. The servants bowed. For the first time in months, Evelyn felt something unfamiliar. Dignity. Her assigned chambers occupied an entire wing overlooking the eastern gardens. Fresh flowers rested on polished tables. A fireplace crackled softly. Warm blankets covered the bed. A physician arrived before sunset. Then a tailor. Then a maid carrying new gowns. Each kindness felt almost painful. She had spent so long expecting cruelty that generosity seemed unreal. Days passed. Then weeks. Outside the castle walls, the kingdom erupted. Newspapers published endless speculation. Some called Alexander noble. Most called him insane. Political allies withdrew invitations. Prominent families canceled negotiations. Mothers warned daughters not to mention the Duke's name. Society had reached its verdict. Alexander Blackwood had ruined himself for a fallen woman. Yet inside the castle, life continued. Alexander never treated Evelyn like a burden. He never asked about the child's father. He never demanded explanations. Instead, he offered patience. At breakfast they discussed books. During walks they spoke about the gardens. Evenings often ended beside the library fire. Gradually Evelyn found herself laughing again. The sound startled her every time. One rainy afternoon she stood watching water race down the windows. "You should not have done this." Alexander looked up from his desk. "Done what?" "Destroyed your reputation for me." He considered the statement carefully. "My reputation is not nearly as fragile as society imagines." "They mock you." "They mocked you first." The answer silenced her. A strange warmth spread through her chest. Not because of the words themselves. Because he had remembered. Because he cared. Autumn arrived. Leaves painted the grounds in gold and crimson. The child within Evelyn grew stronger. So did her feelings. That frightened her more than anything. Alexander represented safety, kindness, strength. Everything Nathaniel had pretended to be. Falling in love with such a man felt dangerous, especially when she carried another man's child. One evening she wandered through a neglected corridor while searching for the library. An old storage room stood partially open. Curiosity drew her inside. Dust covered forgotten furniture and family possessions. She turned to leave when something caught her eye. A collection of childhood sketches lay stacked upon a shelf. One drawing had fallen onto the floor. She picked it up. The picture showed a frozen river. Two children stood beside the ice. One appeared injured. The other knelt beside him. A sudden voice came from the doorway. "Where did you find that?" Alexander stood there staring at the sketch. His expression had changed completely. Evelyn handed it to him. "I found it on the floor." He took the drawing slowly. For several moments he simply looked at it. Then something flickered behind his eyes. Recognition. Memory. "So, when I was 10, he said quietly, "I nearly drowned after falling through river ice." Evelyn listened without understanding. "A girl pulled me out." His gaze lifted toward her. She disappeared before anyone learned her name. The room seemed to grow smaller. Neither moved. Neither spoke. Then Alexander looked again at the faded sketch and finally at the woman standing before him. The realization struck him with undeniable force. The pregnant woman he had rescued from an auction was the same brave child who had once saved his life. For a long time after the discovery, neither Evelyn nor Alexander spoke about the frozen river. The memory lingered between them like a candle burning quietly in a dark room. Something had changed. Not dramatically. Not visibly. Yet both felt it. The strange thread that had drawn their lives together no longer seemed accidental. Evelyn found herself noticing small things she had overlooked before. The way Alexander always stood when she entered a room. The way he instructed servants to bring extra blankets whenever the weather turned cold. The way his eyes softened whenever he heard the unborn child moving. Those details settled deep within her heart. Unfortunately, peace rarely survives happiness for long. 3 days after the discovery in the storage room, Alexander received a visitor. The man arrived before dawn carrying a leather case chained to his wrist. By breakfast, the Duke's expression had grown noticeably darker. Evelyn recognized concern immediately. She found him later inside his study. Letters and documents covered the desk. Several candles still burned despite the morning sunlight. Alexander looked as though he had not left the room for hours. "What happened?" she asked. He hesitated. Then he closed a folder. "I hired investigators several weeks ago." A nervous feeling tightened inside her chest. "To investigate Nathaniel?" Alexander nodded. "The first reports arrived this morning." Silence followed. Evelyn suddenly wished she had never asked. Some truths hurt more than uncertainty. Alexander opened the folder again. "The evidence confirms what I suspected." Her fingers curled against her dress. "What does it say?" His jaw tightened. "Nathaniel never doubted the child was his." The words landed heavily. Evelyn stared at him. For months she had endured shame because Nathaniel claimed uncertainty. For months she had questioned her own worth. For months she had watched society destroy her reputation. Now the truth emerged with brutal simplicity. He had lied. Alexander continued. "Witnesses were bribed. Letters were forged. Several servants have admitted they were paid to spread rumors regarding your character." Evelyn felt the room sway slightly. Not from surprise. From betrayal. A person expects cruelty from enemies. Cruelty from someone once loved leaves deeper scars. She turned toward the window. Beyond the glass, autumn sunlight touched the gardens. The world looked peaceful. Her heart did not. "Why?" she whispered. Alexander answered immediately. "Money." The single word carried enormous weight. He crossed the room and placed another document before her. "This is your grandfather's will." Evelyn blinked. "My grandfather died years ago." "I know." She examined the faded papers. Then confusion slowly replaced sorrow. Several clauses had been highlighted. One passage received special attention. Alexander pointed toward it. "The inheritance transfers through direct bloodline succession." Evelyn read the paragraph twice, then a third time. Her face slowly paled. The meaning became impossible to ignore. The first child she carried would inherit enormous wealth. Land, investments, mining interests, shipping routes, fortunes greater than many noble houses possessed. Her grandfather had hidden most of it within complex trusts designed to protect future descendants. The child represented the key to everything. Alexander watched understanding appear in her eyes. Nathaniel discovered this before the engagement ended. Evelyn lowered the papers. He wanted control. Yes. And if society believed the child illegitimate, the inheritance could be challenged. The room fell silent. At last the entire nightmare made sense. Nathaniel had never abandoned her because of scandal. He had created the scandal. Every cruel accusation, every rumor, every humiliation, all of it served a purpose. The realization made her stomach turn. Not because she had lost him, because she had once loved him. Alexander gently took the documents back. "You were never the target." Evelyn looked up. "The child was." Those words frightened her far more than anything she had learned so far. Instinctively she placed both hands over her stomach. A protective gesture. A mother's gesture. The baby shifted beneath her palms. Alexander noticed immediately. His expression hardened. "No one will harm your child." She wanted to believe him. She truly did. Yet danger suddenly felt much closer. Within days more reports arrived. The investigation expanded. Every new discovery revealed a deeper conspiracy. Nathaniel's debts exceeded imagination. Several gambling houses held claims against him. Private lenders threatened legal action. A desperate man stood behind the polished smile society admired. Worse still, he had not acted alone. Certain noble families had quietly supported his plans. If the inheritance became available, they expected rewards. Influence, partnerships, power. The unborn child now represented something far larger than a family dispute. A struggle for wealth capable of altering political balances throughout the kingdom. The news spread quickly. Too quickly. Whispers began circulating beyond the castle walls. Newspaper articles appeared. Questions followed. Speculation intensified. By winter's approach, people were no longer discussing Evelyn's disgrace. They were discussing her child. Strangers debated the baby's future. Merchants exchanged rumors. Nobles calculated opportunities. Evelyn hated every moment of it. One evening she stood alone in the nursery being prepared beside her chambers. Tiny blankets rested upon a chair. A wooden cradle waited near the fireplace. The room should have felt hopeful. Instead, fear lingered in every corner. Alexander entered quietly. He found her staring at the cradle. "They will never stop, will they?" she asked. He understood the question immediately. The rumors? The greed? He walked beside her. For a moment neither spoke. The fire crackled softly. Outside, snow drifted beyond the windows. Finally Alexander answered. People rarely stop chasing power. The honesty surprised her. But some things are worth protecting. His gaze shifted toward the cradle, then toward her. Evelyn's heartbeat quickened. The silence stretched longer than necessary. Neither looked away. Neither seemed willing to break whatever fragile moment had formed between them. Eventually Alexander spoke. I gave you my word. You have. I intend to keep it. The certainty in his voice settled some of the fear inside her. Not all, but enough. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to imagine a future beyond survival. A future containing peace. Perhaps even love. The thought terrified her. Yet it refused to disappear. That same night, Alexander ordered additional guards throughout the estate. Patrols doubled. Gate inspections increased. Visitors underwent extensive screening. Officially, the changes were precautionary. Unofficially, everyone understood the truth. The threat was becoming real. Several days later, a messenger arrived carrying an intercepted letter. Alexander read it once, then twice. The color drained from his face. Evelyn knew something was wrong before he spoke. What is it? The Duke folded the paper carefully. His eyes remained fixed on the message. It appears certain individuals are no longer interested in challenging the inheritance legally. Cold dread spread through her. What does that mean? Alexander slowly lifted his gaze. It means someone has decided eliminating the heir would be easier. Night descended heavily upon Blackwood Castle. Snow covered the grounds. Wind rattled ancient windows. Inside her chambers, Evelyn finally drifted into uneasy sleep. Hours later, somewhere within the darkness of the estate, a shadow slipped silently over the outer wall. A masked figure moved through the frozen gardens. Past the guards. Past the servants. Past every defense Alexander had built. And beneath the pale moonlight, a gloved hand slowly closed around the handle of a waiting blade. The first scream never came from Evelyn. It came from one of the guards. The cry echoed through Blackwood Castle just after midnight. Steel clashed against steel. A warning bell rang somewhere beyond the eastern wing. Then chaos erupted. Alexander was awake instantly. Years of military discipline propelled him from bed before conscious thought could intervene. Within moments he was racing through dim corridors illuminated by flickering lamps. Servants hurried in confusion. Guards sprinted toward the disturbance. Snow-laden wind howled through an open doorway somewhere below. The castle had been breached. Alexander's first thought was not for himself. It was for Evelyn. He reached her chambers just as another sound shattered the tension. A cry of pain. This one came from her. The moment he entered, he understood. Evelyn stood beside the bed clutching the wooden post. Her face had gone pale. One hand gripped her stomach. The other trembled violently. A maid rushed toward Alexander. My lord, her labor has started. For a heartbeat he simply stared. The timing felt impossible. Outside, an assassin hunted the mother. Inside, her children had chosen this exact night to enter the world. Another contraction struck. Evelyn gasped. Alexander crossed the room immediately. Send for every physician in the castle. The maid hurried away. The Duke turned back to Evelyn. Fear lingered in her eyes. Not fear for herself. Fear for the child. Perhaps children. The doctors had never been entirely certain. It's all right, Alexander said quietly. She tried to smile. The effort nearly broke his heart. Outside the chamber, guards continued searching the castle grounds. An hour later they discovered blood in the snow. The assassin had wounded 2 men before escaping through the gardens. Evidence recovered from his belongings pointed toward a single name. Nathaniel Hawthorne. The news reached Alexander while Evelyn struggled through another painful wave. His hands curled into fists. Rage burned inside him. Nathaniel had spread lies. Destroyed reputations. Attempted theft. Now he had sent a killer. The man had finally crossed a line from which there could be no return. Yet revenge would have to wait. Nothing mattered more than the woman suffering before him. The storm intensified throughout the night. Thunder shook the castle walls. Rain mixed with snow against dark windows. Lightning illuminated the chamber in brilliant flashes. Hours passed. Evelyn's labor became increasingly difficult. The physicians exchanged worried glances. Alexander noticed everyone. Each look tightened the knot in his chest. By dawn, exhaustion consumed her. Sweat dampened her hair. Her breathing grew ragged. The strongest woman he had ever known suddenly looked heartbreakingly fragile. One physician approached quietly. "My lord, perhaps you should wait outside." Alexander looked at the doctor as though he had spoken another language. "No. This could continue for many more hours." "No. The sight may be distressing." Alexander never even glanced away from Evelyn. "I am staying." The physician wisely retreated. Evelyn heard everything. A weak laugh escaped her lips. "Stubborn man." A smile touched Alexander's face. "You noticed." "Everyone notices." Another contraction interrupted them. She cried out despite every effort to remain composed. Alexander immediately took her hand. She squeezed with surprising strength. Neither released the other. The storm continued. Morning became afternoon. Afternoon became evening. The castle existed in a strange world suspended between fear and hope. Outside, guards hunted conspirators. Inside, a family fought to be born. At sunset, the physicians finally realized why the labor had become so dangerous. There were not one child. There were two. The revelation spread through the room instantly. Twins. Alexander stared at Evelyn. Her eyes widened. For a moment both forgot pain. Forgot danger. Forgot everything except the impossible miracle suddenly unfolding before them. Then the true struggle began. The first child arrived shortly before midnight. A son. His cry filled the chamber with astonishing force. Evelyn immediately burst into tears. Alexander could not speak. The physician carefully placed the infant beside his mother. Tiny fingers reached toward the air. A new life. A new future. Yet the ordeal was not finished. The second child remained. Complications followed. Minutes stretched endlessly. The physicians worked frantically. The room became painfully quiet. Even the storm seemed to hold its breath. Alexander watched fear return to Evelyn's face. Not for herself. For the child still fighting to enter the world. Then at last another cry pierced the silence. A daughter. Small. Beautiful. Alive. Relief swept through the room like sunlight breaking through clouds. The physicians smiled. The maids wept openly. Alexander lowered his head and closed his eyes. For the first time in years he offered a prayer. When he looked up again, Evelyn held both children. Tears glistened on her cheeks. The sight struck him with extraordinary force. The disgraced woman society had mocked. The woman auctioned before laughing crowds. The woman everyone called damaged. She looked magnificent. Days later, news spread throughout the kingdom. Not merely about the twins. About the truth. The investigation reached its final stages. Former servants confessed publicly. Witnesses withdrew false testimony. Financial records surfaced. Bribes were uncovered. Nathaniel's carefully constructed lies collapsed one after another. Newspapers that once condemned Evelyn now printed apologies. The kingdom slowly discovered how thoroughly she had been betrayed. Public sympathy shifted rapidly. The woman once mocked became a symbol of endurance. Visitors began sending gifts for the children. Letters arrived daily. Flowers filled entire rooms. Yet the greatest change occurred within Blackwood Castle itself. The twins transformed everything. Laughter appeared where silence once lived. Servants smiled more often. The halls felt warmer. Even Alexander changed. Evelyn noticed it first. The Duke who once seemed carved from stone now spent hours beside the nursery. He learned how to hold the babies. How to calm them. How to recognize different cries. One evening she entered quietly and found him asleep in a chair. Their son rested against his chest. Their daughter slept in the crook of his arm. The sight filled her heart with dangerous hope. Not because he cared. Because he cared so naturally. As though loving them required no effort at all. For the first time, Evelyn allowed herself to imagine that happiness might truly belong to her. The dream lasted exactly 12 days. Then a royal summons arrived. The seal alone darkened the atmosphere. Alexander broke it open. His expression hardened instantly. Evelyn knew the news before he spoke. "Nathaniel," she said softly. The Duke nodded. The disgraced nobleman had made one final move. Using remaining political connections, he demanded a formal hearing before crown officials. He intended to challenge the twins' inheritance rights. He intended to question their legitimacy. He intended to seize whatever power remained within reach. The room fell silent. In the nursery behind them, the twins slept peacefully, unaware that powerful men still viewed them as prizes to be won. Alexander folded the summons carefully. Then he rose to his full height. The calmness in his eyes frightened Evelyn far more than anger would have, because she recognized absolute certainty when she saw it. And as thunder rolled across the distant horizon once more, Duke Alexander Blackwood looked toward the royal capital and publicly declared that he would meet Nathaniel before the crown itself, and end this battle forever. The royal capital had witnessed scandals before. It had witnessed corruption, betrayal, political intrigue, and noble families destroying one another behind polished smiles. Yet nothing in recent memory had attracted attention like the hearing scheduled inside the Crown Assembly Hall. By sunrise, thousands gathered beyond the palace gates. Merchants abandoned their stalls. Servants exchanged rumors. Aristocrats arrived in glittering carriages. Everyone wanted to see how the story would end. The disgraced woman. The powerful duke. The fallen nobleman. The twins whose existence had shaken half the kingdom. Inside the assembly hall, golden chandeliers illuminated rows of nobles seated beneath banners bearing the royal crest. At the center stood a raised platform where crown officials would deliver judgment. Nathaniel Hawthorne entered first. The confidence he once carried had faded. His expensive clothing could not hide the exhaustion beneath his eyes. Debt, fear, and desperation had begun leaving visible marks upon him. Still, arrogance remained. He walked forward believing he could somehow escape consequences. Moments later, another set of doors opened. A hush swept through the hall. Duke Alexander Blackwood entered carrying one of the twins in his arms. Beside him walked Evelyn. The sight alone changed the atmosphere. Months earlier she had stood on an auction platform while strangers mocked her tears. Now she crossed the kingdom's most important hall with dignity untouched by the whispers surrounding her. She wore no crown. No title protected her. Yet somehow she looked stronger than many queens. The second twin rested in the arms of a trusted nurse walking behind them. Alexander guided Evelyn to their place before the crown. Their eyes briefly met. No words passed between them. None were needed. The hearing began immediately. Nathaniel's lawyers presented their arguments first. They questioned timelines. They challenged inheritance laws. They repeated old accusations disguised as legal concerns. Each claim felt carefully rehearsed. Each accusation attempted to reopen wounds that had barely begun healing. Evelyn endured every word. Not because they failed to hurt. Because she had survived far worse. Alexander remained silent throughout. Calm. Patient. Watching. Waiting. When Nathaniel finally finished speaking, the presiding official turned toward the Duke. Your response, Your Grace? Alexander rose slowly. The movement alone seemed to command the room. He carried no stack of dramatic speeches. No emotional performance. Only truth. And truth proved far more dangerous. The first witness entered. A former servant from Nathaniel's estate. She described being paid to spread false rumors about Evelyn. Then came another witness. A clerk who had forged correspondence under Nathaniel's orders. Then another. And another. One by one, the foundations beneath Nathaniel's story began collapsing. Gasps echoed across the hall. Several nobles exchanged uneasy looks. Others suddenly found the floor fascinating. The evidence continued. Financial records revealed enormous gambling debts. Bank statements exposed secret payments. Private letters connected Nathaniel directly to schemes designed to discredit Evelyn before the child could be born. Then came the final document. Alexander placed it before the crown. The original report from the assassin captured weeks earlier. Signed confessions. Payment records. Instructions. Everything led back to Nathaniel. The hall fell silent. No one could deny it anymore. The accusations were no longer allegations. They were facts. Nathaniel's face drained of color. For the first time, genuine fear appeared in his eyes. The crown officials examined every page carefully. Minutes passed. Then the presiding judge stood. His voice echoed through the enormous chamber. Lord Nathaniel Hawthorne knowingly committed fraud, conspiracy, defamation, attempted theft of inheritance, and involvement in a plot resulting in attempted murder. The words struck like hammer blows. Several noble women covered their mouths. Others openly stared. Nathaniel tried to speak. No sound emerged. The judge continued. All claims against Lady Evelyn Ashcroft are hereby dismissed. Evelyn closed her eyes. Emotion surged through her so suddenly she nearly lost balance. Months of humiliation. Months of pain. Months of being treated as though she were worthless. All erased by a single sentence. Alexander quietly placed his hand over hers. A simple gesture. A steadying one. The judge delivered the final ruling. Nathaniel would lose his remaining titles. His estates would be seized. His fortune would be dismantled to repay debts and damages. His reputation would never recover. The man who destroyed others for greed had finally destroyed himself. As guards escorted him away, Nathaniel looked toward Evelyn. Once she would have trembled beneath that stare. Not today. Today she felt nothing. The absence of fear was its own victory. The hearing ended. The kingdom's verdict had been delivered. The truth belonged to everyone now. Yet Alexander knew one final decision remained. Several days later, the royal family hosted a grand banquet celebrating the resolution of the scandal. The event attracted every influential figure in Aldermere. Near the conclusion of the evening, the king summoned Alexander privately before the assembled court. The monarch smiled warmly. "You have served the kingdom with honor." Alexander bowed. The king continued, "It is time you consider your future." A murmur passed through the room. Everyone knew what came next. A proposal. Not of romance. Of politics. The king formally offered a marriage alliance between Alexander and the daughter of a powerful royal house. The advantages were enormous. More influence. More land. Greater authority. Every ambitious nobleman in the kingdom would have accepted immediately. The court waited. Several ladies already looked pleased. Others glanced toward Evelyn with sympathy. Everyone assumed they understood how this story ended. Alexander would choose power. That was what powerful men always did. The duke remained silent for several moments. Then he looked across the ballroom. His gaze found Evelyn standing near the windows. She held their daughter. The little girl slept peacefully against her shoulder. For an instant, the noise of the banquet seemed to disappear. Alexander saw only her. The woman society had discarded. The woman who had saved his life as a child. The woman who had taught him that strength often wore the face of kindness. The woman he loved. He turned back toward the king. "Your Majesty, I am honored." The room relaxed. Many believed his acceptance was coming. Instead, Alexander smiled. "But I must decline." Shock exploded through the ballroom. The king blinked. Several nobles nearly dropped their glasses. Alexander's voice carried clearly through the stunned silence. "There was a time when I believed duty required sacrifice." His eyes returned to Evelyn. "I was wrong." The room followed his gaze. Understanding spread instantly. Alexander walked across the ballroom. Every step deepened the silence. Evelyn watched him approach. Her heart pounded. She sensed what was happening long before he stopped before her. The entire kingdom seemed to hold its breath. Then the most powerful duke in Aldermere dropped to one knee. Gasps echoed everywhere. Tears immediately filled Evelyn's eyes. Alexander looked up at her. Not as a duke. Not as a nobleman. Simply as a man offering his heart. "I rescued you from an auction because it was the right thing to do." His voice softened. "I protected you because you deserved protection." Emotion tightened his throat. But somewhere along the way I realized something far more dangerous. Tears slipped down Evelyn's cheeks. Alexander smiled. "I cannot imagine my life without you." The ballroom disappeared. The crowd disappeared. Only the two of them remained. "Lady Evelyn Ashcroft," he said, "will you do me the greatest honor of my life and become my Duchess?" The answer arrived through tears. "Yes." Applause erupted instantly. Cheers followed. Even members of the royal family rose to their feet. Alexander stood and gently kissed her forehead. The twins began crying at precisely the same moment. Laughter swept through the ballroom. Months later, beneath ringing palace bells and fluttering banners, a grand procession entered the capital. The same streets that once echoed with mockery now overflowed with celebration. The same people who had laughed at an already pregnant woman, now threw flowers before her carriage. Duchess Evelyn Blackwood stepped through the palace gates with her family beside her. Alexander proudly carried their son. Evelyn held their daughter. Together they crossed the threshold of the kingdom that had once rejected them. For a brief moment, Evelyn looked back toward the distant square where her humiliation had begun. The memory remained. But its power was gone. Because the woman who had once stood there alone now walked forward surrounded by love, carrying her child, holding her husband's hand, and entering a future no one could ever auction away again.